In October 1982, a family disappeared from a remote cabin in Idaho, leaving behind nothing but silence and questions that would haunt investigators for over a decade. The Harrisons were the kind of people who made small towns feel safe. Daniel Harrison, 42, worked as a civil engineer at the Regional Water District in Caribou, a tiny town in southeastern Idaho, surrounded by dense pine forests and rolling hills. His wife, Eleanor, 36, taught 4th grade at Caribou Elementary with a patience that made children feel seen and valued. Their son, Ethan, 12, was quiet and thoughtful, always sketching landscapes in his worn notebook. Their daughter, Emma, 8, was fearless and bright, the kind of child who laughed at thunderstorms and collected rocks like treasures. On Friday morning, October 22nd, 1982, the family loaded their dark green Chevrolet Blazer with camping gear and waved goodbye to their neighbor, Mrs. Lawson. They were heading to Mirror Lake, a quiet stretch of water nestled deep in the Caribou National Forest, about 40 miles northeast. The cabin there had belonged to Daniel's late uncle, a simple wood-framed structure with a stone chimney and wide porch overlooking the lake. They were expected back Sunday evening. When Monday arrived and Eleanor didn't show up at school, alarm bells started ringing. Daniel's supervisor tried calling. No answer. By Tuesday, both sets of grandparents had driven to the Harrison house, finding it locked, curtains drawn, mailbox overflowing. Deputies from Caribou County made the drive to Mirror Lake on Wednesday morning. When they arrived, the cabin stood silent, door locked from outside. The key hung on a nail beneath the porch railing, exactly where Daniel always left it. Inside, everything was in perfect order. Beds made, dishes stacked neatly, Eleanor's jacket hanging by the door. Ethan's notebook lay open on the table, a half-finished sketch of the lake visible. But the family was gone. So was their vehicle. No sign of struggle, no blood, no broken glass. It was as though they had simply stepped outside and vanished into the forest. One deputy, Carter, noticed something odd on the porch. A small pile of cigarette butts lay near the railing edge, ground into the wood, as if someone had stood there watching for a long time. Daniel didn't smoke. Neither did Eleanor. Carter bagged the butts and noted them in his report. Search teams mobilized by Thursday. Helicopters flew grid patterns. Volunteers combed trails. Divers searched the dark waters of Mirror Lake. For days, the operation continued. They found nothing. No vehicle tracks. No signs of the family anywhere within 10 miles. By late October, the official search was scaled back. The Harrisons were listed as missing persons, presumed lost in the wilderness. The case faded from headlines within weeks, replaced by elections and other tragedies. Back in Caribou, the Harrison house sat empty. The school held a vigil with flickering candles and wilting flowers. As months turned into silence, the town slowly moved on, though the wound never quite healed. The case file was archived in a basement storage room, sealed in a cardboard box marked 1982 Harrison Family Missing Persons, gathering dust and silence for nearly a year. Then, in late summer 1983, a hiker stumbled across something that would tear the case wide open again. August 14, 1983. Solo hiker Thomas Greer was navigating an unmarked trail near Mirror Lake when he spotted something wedged beneath a fallen pine tree. At first he thought it was trash, maybe camping gear left behind. But when he crouched down and brushed away the dirt, he found a canvas bag, faded and stained with mold. Inside, wrapped in a damp towel, was a disposable camera, the cheap kind sold at gas stations. The film counter showed several photos had been taken. He also found a child's drawing, folded and brittle, depicting a family of 4 standing in front of a cabin. Beneath the sketch, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Our last trip." A chill ran through him despite the warm afternoon. Greer hiked back to the ranger station and handed over the bag. Within hours, the items reached the Caribou County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Laura Finch opened the evidence envelope and immediately recognized the case. She had been part of the original search team. The camera was sent to a forensic lab in Boise. The film was old, exposed to moisture and temperature changes, but technicians salvaged 8 usable images. When the prints came back, they were delivered to Detective Raymond Cole, assigned to review cold cases. Cole spread the photographs across his desk. The first few were ordinary, peaceful. Daniel and Eleanor on the cabin porch, smiling. Ethan holding a fishing rod. Emma chasing a squirrel. Typical vacation moments. But the 5th photograph stopped him cold. It showed the cabin interior at night, curtains drawn, single lamp burning, furniture casting long shadows. The image was out of focus, as if taken in a hurry. No people visible, just the empty room, waiting. The 6th photo was darker, grainier. It showed the cabin door slightly ajar with a sliver of night visible beyond. The 7th image made Cole sit back in his chair. Taken from inside, looking out through the window, the flash had reflected off the glass. But beyond that, barely visible in shadows, was a figure. Tall, motionless, standing just beyond the porch. The shape was indistinct, human but featureless, like a silhouette cut from darkness itself. The 8th and final photo was the most disturbing. It showed Daniel Harrison seated at the cabin table, face pale and drawn, eyes wide, staring directly at the camera. His hands were flat on the table, fingers spread as if bracing himself. Behind him, barely visible in dim light, was the edge of another figure, just a shoulder and part of an arm standing too close. The photo was blurry, but the terror in Daniel's face was unmistakable. Cole called in his forensic team for full analysis. The results were conclusive. The photos were genuine, taken in sequence over a single night, likely October 23rd or 24th, 1982. The discovery changed everything. What had been presumed an accident was now something far darker. Cole reopened the case officially and began pulling every piece of evidence. One detail surfaced during follow-up interviews. Eleanor's sister Claire mentioned that Eleanor had seemed anxious in the weeks before the trip. She said Daniel hadn't been sleeping well, Claire recalled. She said he kept waking up, saying he heard something outside. When Cole pressed for details, Claire hesitated. Eleanor asked me once if I believed in people coming back. I didn't know what she meant. Cole made a note. People coming back. The phrase stuck with him like a splinter. The case was no longer cold. It was alive again, breathing in the dark spaces between photographs. Detective Cole believed in patterns. 20 years working missing persons taught him that even chaotic crimes left breadcrumbs. He started digging into Daniel Harrison's background. Daniel had grown up in southeastern Idaho, younger of 2 brothers. Father was a logger, mother a school nurse. Daniel had been a good student, earned a civil engineering degree from Boise State, married Eleanor in 1968, settled in Caribou in 1970. On paper, unremarkable, stable, ordinary. But Cole had learned that ordinary lives often hid extraordinary secrets. He requested employment records, financial statements, medical history. Nothing unusual. No debts, no legal troubles, no marital discord. Daniel had been a model citizen. Then Cole found a name that didn't fit. Buried in an old county registry from 1961 was a birth certificate for Marcus Harrison, Daniel's older brother. Cole cross-referenced the name with databases. Marcus had been born in 1954, making him 8 years older than Daniel. He had enlisted in the Army in 1972, served 2 tours. In 1976, he was discharged under medical circumstances, diagnosed with severe insomnia and auditory hallucinations. The discharge papers described him as unstable, prone to paranoia and night wandering. After discharge, Marcus had drifted. No permanent address, no employment, no family contact. He had vanished into the margins of society. Cole requested Marcus's medical files from Veterans Affairs. When they arrived, his jaw tightened. The notes described a man unraveling. Sleeps only 2 to 3 hours per night. Reports hearing footsteps in empty rooms. Believes he is being followed. Refuses medication. The final entry, March 1977, noted Marcus had walked out of a VA facility in Twin Falls, Idaho, and never returned. No missing persons report was ever filed. He had become a ghost. Cole pulled out a map and marked 2 locations. Caribou, where Daniel lived. Twin Falls, where Marcus was last seen. The distance was about 120 miles, but the Caribou National Forest sprawled across the region like a dark web. If Marcus had been living off-grid in the wilderness, that forest would have been perfect. Cole contacted the Forest Service and requested reports of unusual activity near Mirror Lake between 1980 and 1982. What came back confirmed his suspicions. Summer 1981, a ranger reported finding a makeshift camp near the North Ridge, about 3 miles from the Harrison cabin. Tarps between trees, empty cans, fire pit. The ranger assumed it was a drifter and didn't follow up. October 1982, 2 weeks before the Harrisons disappeared, another ranger logged a complaint from a fisherman who claimed he saw a man watching him from the tree line. The man didn't speak, didn't approach, just stood staring until the fisherman left. The description matched Marcus Harrison. Cole sat back and stared at his evidence board. At the center was a photo of the Harrison family, smiling and whole. Around it he had pinned maps, timelines, witness statements, and the 8 photographs from the camera. On the far right, he taped a photocopy of Marcus Harrison's military ID. The resemblance between brothers was striking. Same jawline, same eyes, same serious expression. But where Daniel's face radiated stability, Marcus's eyes held hollowness, disconnection. Cole drew a red line connecting Marcus's last known location to Mirror Lake. The timeline fit, the behavior fit. He picked up the phone and called the forensic lab. "I need you to re-examine the cigarette butts from the cabin. Run DNA and cross-reference with military records for Marcus Harrison." 3 days later, results came back. The cigarette butts contained saliva. DNA was a familial match to Daniel Harrison. Sibling probability, 98%. Marcus had been there, standing on that porch, smoking, watching, waiting. Cole felt cold certainty settle over him. The Harrisons hadn't vanished into wilderness. They had been taken by someone who knew them, someone who had once been family. Cole returned to Mirror Lake in early September 1983 with a forensic team and warrant to conduct thorough search. The cabin stood sagging under time's weight, windows dark and lifeless. Cole stepped onto the porch, imagining Marcus standing there, watching the family inside. The forensic team went to work, dusting for prints, photographing surfaces, cataloging objects. Cole moved through slowly, flashlight cutting through gloom. The air was thick with mildew and rot. He walked to the table where Daniel had been photographed that final night, face pale with fear. What had Daniel been thinking? Had he known what was coming? Cole knelt by the fireplace where deputies found ash during the original search. With fresh eyes, he sifted through cold soot carefully. Embedded in ash were charred paper remains, brittle and blackened, but not entirely destroyed. He lifted fragments with tweezers into evidence bags. Near the hearth, Cole noticed a loose floorboard, edge slightly raised. He pried it up, revealing a shallow crawl space. Inside, wrapped in a faded wool blanket, was a small metal box. Cole opened the latch. The contents made his breath catch. Inside were 3 items: a folded letter, yellowed with age, a military dog tag engraved Marcus J. Harrison, and a black and white photograph of 2 boys standing in front of the same cabin. On the back, in faded pencil, was written Daniel and Marcus, summer 1964. Cole read the letter slowly. It was handwritten, script uneven and hurried. dated October 20th, 1982, just 2 days before the Harrisons disappeared. It read, "I thought I could stay away. I thought the woods would keep me quiet, but the voices don't stop. They say I belong here. Daniel knows. He always knew. I see the lights at night and remember before everything broke. I just want to come home. I just want to be still." The letter was unsigned, but Cole had no doubt who wrote it. Marcus had been living in the forest, circling the cabin like a wounded animal, drawn back to the only place that felt like home. Daniel had known his brother was out there. The cigarette butts, the footsteps Eleanor mentioned, the sleepless nights. Daniel had been waiting for Marcus to appear, hoping he wouldn't, knowing he would. The forensic team finished by late afternoon. One technician approached Cole grimly. "We found blood traces beneath the floorboards near the back door. Not much, but enough to test." Cole nodded. "Keep it quiet." As the team packed equipment, Cole walked down to the lakeshore. Near the water's edge, he found boot prints, deep and distinct, preserved in dried clay. He measured them. Size 11, consistent with prints on the porch and the figure in photographs. Marcus had walked this path many times, moving between forest and cabin, watching, waiting, building courage or desperation to finally step inside. That night in his motel room, Cole spread evidence across the bed. The photographs, letter, dog tag, boot prints. They told a story of two brothers, one trying to hold life together, the other spiraling into darkness. But the story wasn't complete. Cole still didn't know what happened that final night. Had Marcus confronted Daniel? Had there been a fight? Had the family tried to run? And most importantly, where were they now? He closed his eyes and let his mind piece together the sequence. Marcus approaches late at night. Daniel hears him, steps outside to talk. Maybe tries to reason with him, offer help, convince him to leave. But Marcus is too far gone. Something snaps. A struggle? Daniel goes down. Eleanor wakes, realizes what's happening. She grabs the kids, tries to flee. But Marcus is faster, stronger, driven by desperate need to reclaim what he lost. He takes control. He loads them into the vehicle. He drives them into the forest, deeper, until the trees swallow them whole. The Boise lab worked through the night recovering text from charred paper fragments. By morning, they reconstructed 3 partial sentences. The handwriting was Eleanor's, neat despite trembling strokes. The first fragment read, "He won't leave. I see him every night now." The second, "Daniel says we have to stay calm. He says Marcus just needs time." The third, most haunting, "If something happens to us, please know we tried." Cole stared at the words. Eleanor had known they were in danger. She had written these lines as a warning, a message hoping someone would find it. But she burned the pages, perhaps fearing Marcus would discover them, or because she couldn't let the children see her terror written down. The message survived barely, just enough to confirm what Cole suspected. The Harrisons hadn't disappeared by accident. They had been trapped, hunted by someone they once loved. The blood analysis came back 3 days later. The sample was degraded, but sufficient for partial profile. It matched Daniel Harrison with 96% certainty. Daniel had been injured inside the cabin, possibly during struggle. The blood amount suggested significant wound, though not necessarily fatal. Cole cross-referenced the location with cabin layout. Blood was found near the back door, same door leading to Forest Trail. Daniel had tried to escape, or perhaps tried to lead Marcus away from his family. He hadn't made it far. Cole requested full search of the area surrounding the cabin, focusing on trails leading deeper into forest. A cadaver dog team was brought from Boise, along with volunteers. They combed the forest methodically, walking tight grid patterns, calling coordinates, marking locations with flags. The search continued 5 days. The forest was dense, undergrowth thick with ferns and fallen logs, visibility limited, terrain treacherous with hidden ravines and steep slopes. On the afternoon of the 5th day, one dog alerted near old-growth pines, about 2 miles northeast of the cabin. The team converged. Beneath tangled roots and moss, they found a shallow depression, partially concealed by branches and dead leaves. When they cleared debris, they uncovered a makeshift shelter, a lean-to constructed from tarps and scavenged wood. Inside were camp remnants, empty cans, rusted cooking pot, torn sleeping bag, stack of yellowed newspapers dating to 1981. In the corner, wrapped in plastic garbage bag, was a military jacket, faded olive green, with Harrison stitched on the chest. Marcus had been living here, just 2 miles from the cabin where his brother's family slept. He had survived in the wild for years, watching them from distance, circling closer until the night he finally crossed the threshold. The team photographed everything and bagged evidence. But they didn't find what they were looking for. No bodies, no vehicle, no sign of the missing family. That evening, Cole met with retired forest ranger Jim Halstead, who had spent 40 years working Caribou National Forest. Cole spread a map across the table. If you wanted to hide a vehicle out here, somewhere it wouldn't be found for years, where would you go? Halstead studied the map, then tapped a spot 8 miles northwest of the lake. Here. Old logging road. Hasn't been used since the 70s. Runs along a ravine. Steep drop-off on one side, thick trees on the other. If you went over the edge, you'd disappear into undergrowth. Nobody goes there anymore. Cole felt spark of hope. Can you take me there? Halstead nodded. We leave at dawn. The next morning, Cole, Halstead, and deputies made the rough drive up the abandoned logging road. The path was barely visible, overgrown with saplings and choked with branches. They hiked the last mile on foot, following Halstead's lead as he navigated by memory. When they reached the ravine, Cole peered over the edge. The slope dropped sharply, disappearing into tangled brush and shadow. Easy to miss something down there. The team secured ropes and descended carefully. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, sunlight filtering through canopy and thin beams. 50 feet down, one deputy called out. Cole hurried over. Half buried in dirt and debris, covered in moss and rust, was a vehicle's rear bumper. They worked carefully, clearing soil and vegetation. Slowly the shape emerged. A dark green Chevrolet Blazer, nose down in the ravine, frame twisted from years of erosion. The license plate was barely legible beneath grime. It matched Daniel Harrison's vehicle. Cole's heart pounded as they pried open the driver's door. Inside, seats were rotted, dashboard cracked and faded, but the remains were unmistakable. In the front passenger seat, still belted, were skeletal remains of a woman. In the back, 2 smaller sets of bones, side by side, hands still touching. Eleanor. Ethan. Emma. They had been here all along, hidden beneath the forest floor, waiting to be found. But the driver's seat was empty. Cole stared at that empty seat. If the family was here, who had been driving? The forensic team worked meticulously, extracting remains and processing every inch of the vehicle. The bodies were transported to the state medical examiner in Boise. Preliminary autopsy results confirmed Cole's fears. None of the 3 died from blunt force trauma consistent with vehicular accident. Positioning of remains, lack of defensive wounds, absence of significant skeletal fractures all suggested they had been alive when the vehicle descended, but succumbed to exposure or asphyxiation in hours or days that followed. It was slow, agonizing death, trapped in wreckage with no hope of rescue. The forensic team turned attention to the driver's seat. The steering wheel bore multiple fingerprint sets, most too degraded. But one partial print on the wheel's underside was clear enough to process. The lab ran it through every database. The match came back within 48 hours. Marcus J. Harrison. The print confirmed what Cole suspected. Marcus had been behind the wheel that night. He had driven his brother's family into the forest, perhaps intending to hide them, perhaps driven by twisted logic only he understood. But if Marcus was driving, where was Daniel? The empty driver's seat, blood traces in cabin, photographs showing Daniel's terrified face, and absence of his remains all pointed to one grim conclusion. Daniel Harrison had been the first to die. He had confronted his brother, tried to protect his family, and paid the ultimate price. Cole requested a second, more intensive search around the cabin, focusing on locations where someone panicked or unstable might conceal a body. The team expanded radius, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. For 2 weeks, nothing. Then, on a cold morning in late September, one dog alerted near a rocky outcrop half a mile south of the cabin. The team approached carefully. The outcrop was partially concealed by dense brush and fallen logs, a natural hiding place easy to overlook. Beneath a pile of stones and dirt, they found remains of a man, buried in shallow grave. The body was in advanced decomposition, but clothing was intact. Flannel shirt, work boots, canvas jacket. Same clothes Daniel Harrison wore in family photographs. The forensic team excavated carefully. The skull showed blunt force trauma, a fracture along left temple consistent with heavy blow. The medical examiner later confirmed the injury had been fatal, likely causing immediate unconsciousness and death within minutes. Daniel had been struck down quickly, violently, before he had chance to fight back. With Daniel's body recovered, investigation shifted to its final phase, locating Marcus Harrison. Cole pulled every record, tracing Marcus's movements from the time he left the VA facility in 1977 to the night of the Harrison disappearance in 1982. The trail was faint, scattered reports of a drifter seen in various towns across southeastern Idaho. Spring 1983, a shopkeeper in Soda Springs, 30 miles west of Caribou, reported a man matching Marcus's description, purchasing supplies, canned food, rope, hunting knife. The shopkeeper remembered because he paid in exact change and hadn't spoken a word. July 1983, a rancher near Grace reported finding evidence of someone camping on his property, fire pit, empty cans, torn military jacket. The jacket was left behind. Cole had it tested. DNA matched Marcus Harrison. He had been moving through the region, drifting place to place, surviving on society's fringes. But after October 22, 1982, sightings stopped. Marcus had vanished. Cole requested FBI assistance. They had resources local sheriff's office lacked. They ran Marcus's profile through National Crime Information Center, cross-referencing with unidentified remains and John Doe cases across the western United States. The search took weeks. Then, early October 1983, a match came through. An unidentified male body had been discovered in February 1983 by cross-country skiers in Caribou National Forest, about 12 miles northeast of Mirror Lake. The body had been partially consumed by wildlife and exposure, making identification difficult. At the time, remains had been logged as unknown transient. The body was buried in unmarked grave in County Cemetery, case closed. But when FBI re-examined dental records and compared them to Marcus Harrison's military files, the match was conclusive. The unidentified body was Marcus. He had died alone in the forest, just months after the night he destroyed his family. The 1983 autopsy report listed cause of death as exposure, but Cole suspected more to the story. Marcus had been found seated against a tree, arms wrapped around his knees, as if he had simply sat down and waited for cold to take him. In his pocket, the original investigating officer noted a small photograph, creased and faded. The photo was still in evidence locker. Cole retrieved it and held it to light. It showed two boys standing in front of cabin, smiling. Daniel and Marcus, summer 1964. Same image Cole found in metal box beneath cabin floor. Marcus had carried it to the end, a remnant of time before everything broke. Cole sat back in his chair. The pieces were falling into place, but the complete picture remained elusive. He needed to reconstruct that final night, understand the sequence of events that led from a family vacation to multiple deaths scattered across the Idaho wilderness. Cole began writing his final report, documenting the timeline based on evidence collected. October 22nd, 1982, the Harrisons arrived at Mirror Lake. Weather was clear, autumn air crisp. They unpacked, settled in, spent evening fishing and preparing dinner. The family seemed happy, unaware they were being watched. Marcus had been living in Forest for months, surviving in his camp 2 miles away. He saw cabin lights go on, heard laughter and voices on the wind. Something inside him stirred, longing for connection, warmth, the life he lost. Or perhaps something darker, envy, resentment, belief that what Daniel had should have been his. As night fell, Marcus moved closer. He stood on porch, smoking cigarettes, peering through windows. He saw Daniel tucking children into bed, Eleanor washing dishes by lamplight. He saw a life that felt familiar, yet unbearably distant. At some point, Daniel noticed him, perhaps saw a shadow move past window or heard footsteps on porch. He stepped outside, hoping to find a deer or raccoon. Instead, he found his brother. Cole imagined the moment of recognition. Daniel's shock, Marcus's silence. Perhaps they spoke. Perhaps Daniel tried to convince Marcus to leave, offered food or money, promised to get him help. But Marcus was too far gone, mind fractured by years of isolation and untreated illness. He believed he belonged there. He believed the cabin was as much his as Daniel's. When Daniel refused to let him inside, something snapped. Marcus struck him, single brutal blow with rock or firewood. Daniel collapsed, unconscious, bleeding from head. Marcus dragged him into Forest, away from cabin, and buried him in shallow grave beneath rocky outcrop. It was quick, efficient, act of man who had already crossed a line and couldn't turn back. When Marcus returned to the cabin, Eleanor was awake. She had heard the commotion, called out for Daniel. Marcus stepped inside. Eleanor saw him and froze. She recognized him from old photographs, from stories Daniel told. She knew who he was. She also knew, in that terrible instant, that Daniel was gone. The children woke, frightened by tension in air. Marcus told them to stay quiet, to pack their things. He said they were leaving. Eleanor, terrified and desperate, tried to reason with him. She asked where Daniel was, begged him to let them go. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was operating on internal logic that made sense only to him. He believed he was protecting them, taking them somewhere safe, somewhere they could all be together. He loaded them into vehicle, Eleanor in front, children in back. He drove into Forest, following abandoned logging roads he knew by heart. Eleanor pleaded, tried to grab wheel, but Marcus was stronger. He drove for miles, deeper into wilderness, until road ended at ravine. What happened next remained unclear. Perhaps Marcus intended to turn back. Perhaps he lost control. Or perhaps, in moment of clarity or madness, he chose to drive over edge. The vehicle tipped forward, sliding down slope, crashing through underbrush, and coming to rest at ravine bottom. The impact wasn't severe enough to kill them instantly. Forensic evidence suggested Eleanor and children survived for hours, maybe days, trapped in wreckage. Doors were jammed, windows shattered but too small to crawl through. They waited in dark, calling for help, hoping someone would find them. But no one came. The forest was vast and silent. Eventually, exposure and dehydration took them. Marcus, meanwhile, had either been thrown from vehicle during descent or managed to climb out afterward. He wandered through forest, injured and disoriented. Perhaps he tried to find way back to cabin. Perhaps he simply walked until he couldn't walk anymore. By February 1983, he was dead, frozen and alone, still clutching photograph of the life he destroyed. Cole sat back, weight of story settling over him. It was tragedy in truest sense, not result of calculated evil, but of broken minds, fractured families, and system that failed to intervene before it was too late. Marcus hadn't been monster. He had been sick man, abandoned and forgotten, left to spiral into darkness until there was no way back. The case was officially closed in November 1983. The bodies of Daniel, Eleanor, Ethan, and Emma Harrison were buried together in Caribou Town Cemetery. The funeral was attended by hundreds, teachers, students, neighbors, strangers, who followed the story and felt weight of loss. A simple granite headstone marked the grave. The Harrison family. Together, always. Marcus Harrison was buried separately in unmarked section of cemetery, reserved for indigents and unclaimed. No one attended his burial except gravedigger and single deputy. Cole stood at cemetery edge as sun set over Idaho hills, casting long shadows across graves. He thought about the two brothers, one buried with his family, the other alone. He thought about choices that led them here, moments where different decision might have changed everything. But past was fixed, immutable. All that remained was memory, and hope that living would learn from mistakes of dead. The closure of Harrison case left void in Caribou. The empty Harrison house stood as silent monument to loss, windows dark, yard overgrown. For months, no one wanted to go near it. Eventually, a distant relative arrived to settle estate. The house was cleared, sold, repainted. New family moved in. But the story didn't fade. In town as small as Caribou, memories were long, and Harrisons became part of local mythology. Cautionary tale whispered around campfires and dinner tables. Detective Raymond Cole took leave of absence in winter 1983, retreating to cabin in mountains. He spent days hiking through snow-covered forests, trying to clear his mind. But the case followed him. He thought about Marcus, alone and broken, wandering wilderness. He thought about Daniel, desperately trying to protect his family. He thought about Eleanor and children, trapped in wreckage, waiting for rescue that never came. The weight was crushing. One evening, Deputy Laura Finch called. A journalist from Boise was asking questions about Harrison case, requesting files and interviews. Cole felt surge of anger. The family deserves to rest. Last thing they need is their tragedy turned into headline. Finch agreed, but warned the story was already leaking. True crime enthusiasts had picked up on it, drawn by eerie details and tragic outcome. Cole knew she was right. There was no stopping it. Cole returned to work spring 1984, but he was changed. He moved through cases methodically, efficiently, but passion that once drove him was gone. He had seen too much, lost too much of himself in pursuit of answers. By 1986, he retired, citing health reasons. He moved to Oregon, bought small house near coast, spent remaining years in quiet solitude. He never spoke publicly about Harrison case, turning down every interview request and book offer. In final years, Cole kept single photograph on his desk. Image of Harrison family, smiling at Mirror Lake, taken hours before everything fell apart. He looked at it often, not as detective studying evidence, but as man mourning loss of something he could never fully understand. When Cole died in 2003, his personal effects were donated to Caribou County Historical Society. Among them was leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes and reflections. Final entry, dated May 1987, read, "Some cases you solve, Some cases solve you. The Harrisons taught me that truth doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just shows you how fragile everything is. Back in Caribou, Harrison case became local legend, told and retold with variations. Some claimed cabin at Mirror Lake was haunted, that hikers heard children's laughter echoing through trees at night. Others said Marcus's ghost wandered forest, forever searching for family he lost. The stories were nonsense, product of fear and imagination, but they persisted because people needed way to make sense of senseless, to transform tragedy into narrative. The cabin itself was eventually torn down by Forest Service, deemed unsafe. The land was left to return to nature. Small plaque was placed near site, reading, "In memory of the Harrison family." Lost, but not forgotten. It was simple gesture, inadequate in face of such profound loss, but it was something. A marker that said they existed, that their lives mattered, that their story deserved to be remembered. The Harrison case cast ripples far beyond Caribou. In 2003, veteran named Thomas Brennan read about the case while recovering from PTSD treatment at VA facility in Oregon. Thomas had served in First Gulf War, returned struggling with nightmares, anxiety, deepening alienation. He had been on verge of giving up, of disappearing into wilderness like Marcus. But reading about Marcus's descent, the letters Daniel wrote, family destroyed by system that failed to act, Thomas felt something shift. He realized he wasn't alone, that his actions had consequences beyond himself. He recommitted to treatment, reached out to estranged family, eventually became advocate for veterans' mental health. Years later, Thomas would say the Harrison story had shown him a future he refused to accept. Meanwhile, in Caribou, the case shaped community in subtle but significant ways. In 2005, Town Council approved funding for Mobile Crisis Intervention Team, small group of trained counselors who could respond to mental health emergencies in rural areas. The program was modest, underfunded, often overwhelmed, but it represented shift in thinking, acknowledgement that prevention was possible, that intervention mattered. In 2001, cabin site at Mirror Lake was officially designated memorial area by Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation. Small wooden sign was erected near trail bearing simple inscription, "In memory of the Harrison family. May they find peace." The dedication ceremony was attended by a handful of locals and few journalists. One attendee, elderly woman named Ruth, had been Eleanor Harrison's colleague at Caribou Elementary, one of last people to see family before they disappeared. "We don't talk about them much anymore," Ruth said quietly. "People think it's better to forget. But I remember Eleanor every day. She was kind. She deserved better." As sun began to set over Mirror Lake, casting long shadows across water, those gathered stood in silence, bound by memory of people lost and shared, understanding that some losses can never be measured or reconciled. The Harrison children, Ethan and Emma, were not forgotten. In 2008, Caribou Elementary School established Harrison Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to students demonstrating kindness, curiosity, and resilience, qualities that defined Ethan and Emma in their brief lives. Each year, at ceremony held in school auditorium, recipients would stand on stage and listen as teacher read short biography of Ethan and Emma, their love of drawing and laughter, their bright futures cut tragically short. It was bittersweet tradition, way of keeping their names alive while acknowledging loss that could never be undone. For recipients, scholarship was more than financial support. It was reminder that their lives mattered, that they were part of community that valued them, and that even in face of tragedy, hope and kindness could endure. Back at Mirror Lake, Memorial Site became unexpected place of pilgrimage for those touched by similar losses. Hikers and campers left small tokens at base of memorial sign, flowers, stones, handwritten notes. Some were addressed to Harrison family directly, messages of sympathy and sorrow. Others were more personal, confessions from people who lost loved ones to violence, mental illness, or wilderness itself. The site became a place where grief could be expressed and witnessed, where invisible weight of loss could be set down, even if just for a moment. Park rangers eventually embraced it, recognizing site served purpose beyond official commemoration. One ranger made habit of visiting site monthly, collecting notes and tokens, storing them carefully in box at ranger station, preserving them as testament to enduring impact of Harrison's story. When he retired in 2015, he donated the box to Caribou County Historical Society, where it remains, quiet archive of collective grief and resilience. The story found its way into classrooms, not as entertainment, but as case study in ethics, mental health, and social responsibility. Forensic psychology professors used Harrison case in courses, challenging students to think critically about systemic failures, complexities of mental illness, and importance of early intervention. Students, many going on to careers in social work, counseling, and criminal justice, carried lessons of Harrison case with them, applying them in their own communities and advocating for changes that might prevent similar tragedies. In this way, Harrison's story became part of larger conversation about how society cares for its most vulnerable members and what responsibility we bear for those who fall through cracks. The tragedy that destroyed them had also, paradoxically, inspired action, compassion, and change. It was small redemption, insufficient in face of such profound loss, but it was something. In 2018, 36 years after Harrison family disappeared, construction crew working on trail expansion near Mirror Lake made unexpected discovery. While clearing brush, one worker noticed something wedged beneath rotting log, a small metal tin, rusted and partially buried. Inside, protected by layers of waxed paper, was a collection of photographs, some faded and water-damaged, others remarkably preserved. The crew contacted authorities. When photographs were examined, investigators realized they belonged to Harrison family. Most images were familiar, matching those in case file. But 3 photographs had never been seen before. First showed Marcus Harrison standing at edge of Mirror Lake, back to camera, staring at water. Image was haunting in its simplicity, lone figure silhouetted against vast wilderness, neither threatening nor peaceful, just alone. Second photograph was taken inside cabin, showing Daniel and Marcus sitting across from each other at table, faces serious, body language tense. They were clearly in middle of difficult conversation, moment of confrontation or reconciliation frozen in time. Third photograph stopped everyone who saw it. It showed entire Harrison family, Daniel, Eleanor, Ethan, and Emma, standing together on cabin porch. But this time, Marcus was in frame as well, standing slightly apart from group, his expression unreadable. Someone had set camera on timer or tripod, capturing all 5 in single image. The photograph was dated October 23, 1982, the day before family disappeared. It was only known image of Marcus and Harrison family together, and it raised more questions than it answered. Had this been an attempt at reconciliation, final effort by Daniel to connect with his brother? Had Marcus been invited to join them, or had he simply appeared and inserted himself into their lives? The faces in photograph offered no clear answers. Eleanor looked tense, smile forced. Children seemed confused, uncertain. Daniel's expression was unreadable, somewhere between hope and resignation. And Marcus, standing at edge of frame, looked like man who didn't quite belong, who was present, but not truly part of picture. The discovery of photographs reignited public interest in case. True crime podcasts devoted episodes to Harrison family. Journalists wrote retrospectives. Online forums buzzed with theories. But for those who lived through original tragedy, photographs were a painful reminder of what had been lost. A forensic psychologist who had studied the case for years requested copies of newly discovered photographs. When they arrived, she spent hours studying them, particularly final image of 5 people standing on porch. What she saw was family on edge of collapse, held together by love and duty, but fracturing under weight of burden they couldn't name or escape. She saw Daniel's impossible choice: protect his family by keeping Marcus away, or protect his brother by letting him in. She saw Eleanor's fear, masked by politeness and hope. She saw children's innocence, unaware they were standing at threshold of their own destruction. And she saw Marcus, ghost haunting his own life, desperate to return to something he had lost long before he ever left. The newly discovered photographs were eventually archived at Idaho State Historical Society, available to researchers and public, but with strict guidelines about their use. They were not to be sensationalized, not to be used for entertainment, but preserved as historical documents that told story about family, mental illness, and fragility of human connection. As of 2025, Harrison case remains one of most studied family disappearance cases in Idaho history, cited in academic papers, legal discussions, and advocacy campaigns. The memorial at Mirror Lake still stands, weathered but intact, and people still leave flowers and notes, though fewer each year as memory fades and new tragedies demand attention. But story endures, not because it offers comfort or resolution, but because it refuses to let us look away from difficult truths it reveals. The final truth about Harrison family is that there are no final truths, only fragments and interpretations, evidence and speculation, memory and meaning constructed from ruins of what was lost. Decades have passed since that October night in 1982, and world has changed in countless ways, but fundamental questions raised by case remain as urgent and unanswered as ever. How do we protect vulnerable without stigmatizing mental illness? How do we balance individual freedom with collective safety? How do we build systems that genuinely serve those who need them, rather than simply processing them through bureaucratic machinery until they disappear? These are not questions with easy answers, and Harrison case offers no simple solutions. What it offers instead is mirror, reflecting back failures and limitations of systems we rely on, and terrible consequences when those systems break down. In years since case was officially closed, wilderness around Mirror Lake has remained largely unchanged. Trees still stand tall and silent. Water still reflects sky. Forest still holds its secrets close. Hikers pass through, unaware of tragedy that unfolded among these trees, or perhaps pausing briefly at memorial sign before continuing on their way. For people of Caribou, Harrison family has become part of town's collective memory. Story passed down from one generation to next, evolving with each telling. Some remember them as victims of senseless tragedy. Others as symbols of dangers of rural isolation and inadequate mental health care. But for those who knew them personally, who taught alongside Eleanor, or worked with Daniel, or played with Ethan and Emma, Harrisons remain stubbornly human, not symbols or lessons, but real people whose absence is still felt in quiet, persistent ways. The elementary school where Eleanor taught has photograph of her in staff room, smiling beside classroom door, reminder of her dedication and kindness. The water district where Daniel worked named their annual safety award in his honor, recognizing his commitment to protecting others even when he couldn't protect his own family. And children, Ethan and Emma, are remembered through scholarship that bears their name, ensuring their brief lives continue to make difference for others. These are small gestures, insufficient to heal wound or restore what was lost, but they matter nonetheless. They say Harrisons were here, that they were loved, and that their memory deserves to be preserved with dignity and respect. As for Marcus Harrison, his legacy is more complicated. He is buried in unmarked section of cemetery, apart from his family, symbol of distance that grew between them in life and persisted beyond death. Some view him as monster, others as victim of circumstances beyond his control. The truth lies somewhere in between. Marcus was man whose mind was broken by trauma, whose cries for help were ignored by system that had neither resources nor will to save him. He made terrible choices, choices that destroyed his family and ended multiple lives. But those choices were made in context of profound illness and abandonment. This does not excuse what he did, but it demands that we understand it, that we reckon with ways in which society creates conditions for such tragedies to unfold. The forest around Mirror Lake keeps its silence, as it always has. The cabin where Harrison family spent their final hours is long gone, reclaimed by nature, its foundation barely visible beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves. The ravine where vehicle was found has been marked on maps, but remains inaccessible to all but most determined searchers. And shallow grave where Daniel Harrison was buried has been filled in and covered, indistinguishable from rest of forest floor. In time, all physical traces of tragedy will disappear, eroded by wind and weather, consumed by endless cycle of growth and decay. But story will remain, passed down through files and photographs, through academic papers and memorial ceremonies, through memories of those who were touched by loss. It will remain because it must, because alternative, forgetting, allowing Harrison family to disappear from history as thoroughly as they disappeared from that cabin in 1982, would be second, more profound tragedy. Memory is only form of justice we can offer to those who are gone, and Harrisons deserve to be remembered. Not as cautionary tales or true crime entertainment, but as human beings who lived and loved and suffered, who were destroyed by forces they couldn't control, and whose loss continues to echo through lives of those who remain. And so story ends where it began, in silence of Idaho wilderness, where mountains rise cold and indifferent, where lake reflects sky like mirror, and where 5 people once stood together on porch, captured in photograph, frozen in moment before everything changed.